Hello and welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be talking about the Chronology of Scorn. One thing that interested me about the February update was a statement that the Scorn devs worked on the game in chronological order. They started at the very beginning of the game and then progressed through the levels that the player would go through as they went on, as opposed to separating team members and having some work on the later game, some work on the earlier game, the sort of thing you would expect from a larger budget studio. That wasn't them at the time. Now, that changed eventually when Kowloon Knights funded them, but for a period from 2013 to at least early 2018, they were working on the game from A to B to C to D and so on, and we have plenty of footage from those moments, as well as footage from early moments posted on their Twitter account and Facebook accounts and such by Megna, the game's social media manager. So I thought it would be interesting to try and look through the footage and screenshots of the game and try to figure out when those moments take place in comparison to each other. Now, not having a full idea of everything, some things might end up being earlier or later than I predict, but I think there are plenty of things that we have a pretty good grasp on. The earliest footage we've gotten is of Scorn Guy interacting with this puzzle. He does not have any painful augmentations embedded into his left hand that he does in all the screenshots and gameplay trailers we've seen so far. An unknown time later, Scorn Guy wanders into a room, probably the very earliest part of a massive facility, and gets the telltale wrist key that allows him to receive health and interact with the standard consoles seen throughout the various trailers. Immediately after receiving the wrist key, he interacts with one of those consoles. You can see it's his very first time, not just because he didn't have a wrist key before, but because there's an additional animation of him caressing the console and failing to put his hand inside of the glove. Though the clip speaks with an innate familiarity with how to use the technology in the world of Scorn, it does speak to a lack of experience by our protagonist here. Following that, our wayward protagonist finds the very first of the machines that is used to replenish the healing bulbs on his coral. Notice how there's no ammunition in it. Scorn Guy has not gotten his first gun, and yet he has at some point received the jackhammer device. The reason I think this is the first time he's using this is simply due to the framing, where in the 2020 gameplay trailer it's just kind of on the side on a wall. This one is framed and illuminated by a light. It's front and center, it wants to be used, it wants Scorn Guy, the player, to know it is useful. Also notice the bear corpses surrounding this area. We didn't see any bear corpses in the room where he got the wrist key, which means at some point between this room and that room, he might have met the first of these ever-present creatures. Now, I don't know for absolute certain if this is after that moment. Given that he ends with 4 of those health nodules, it could be before he interacted with the machine in the previous clip, but nonetheless, it is around the same time. Notice the copious amount of bear corpses, the acid on the ground that indicates one of them got into a fight, and the blood that's still warm and running down his hand from when he received the wrist key. The last of the clips that the PR person has posted on social media so far is of Scorn Guy moving one of the spheres used to transport him around the facility down to a lower level. There's copious amounts of bears clinging to it, and an admittingly very goofy spectacle of some of them just falling off. This clip was accompanied by the caption, "Actions have consequences," and though in response to me he insisted it was a statement of generality of something throughout the game, I can't help but to wonder if this might be the first time Scorn Guy ever directly interferes with these creatures. After all the other times he's just kind of walking by their corpses, paying no mind to them as they do not pay any mind to him. But now he's disturbing their sleep. It is entirely possible that he has just rustled the hive, and if that is so, he has just made things significantly worse for him. If only he could just crawl over them or walk around them, but I guess not. Scorn Guy isn't exactly athletic. In any case, look at where he is now, this sprawling Gigerian facility covered wall to wall with bear corpses. Where have we seen that? None other than both gameplay trailers. Yes, the gameplay trailers have been confirmed to take place in the same general area, perhaps even being just one massive level in a series of other levels. We know at some point before the gameplay trailers take place, Scorn Guy receives a pistol. It's likely the very first ranged weapon he receives in the game. An all-around reliable weapon, but not too powerful. From there, he continues his explorations, being wary of the various bears and other monstrosities that inhabit the halls of this once likely bustling facility, and taking a lot of damage, dealing a lot of damage, interacting with machines, you know, Scorn stuff. At some point after receiving the pistol, he gets the shotgun, a much more powerful weapon, but one you need to get up close and personal with your enemies in order to utilize effectively. And the very last weapon he receives so far is the grenade launcher, a rather powerful area of effect weapon that doesn't seem to have too much ammo. It is able to take care of the ceiling penises and floppy bastards real quick though. By this point in time, I suspect that the player is supposed to be familiar with all of the very basic mechanics, and now what's left is figuring out what to go and what to do in order to get to the new area and to be aware of the potential dangers they might face. There will be puzzles, there will be new enemies, there will likely be other weapons to utilize against the horrors that dwell, but we just haven't exactly seen them. But this is all from the gameplay trailers. There is one trailer that I have neglected, and that is the one from 2016. Given when this trailer was made, everything in it is firmly in part 1 of the game, and likely firmly near the very start of the game. The first shot we see is of these towering, neat pillars. We've seen those a few times afterwards in the social media posts, but it's been stated that there are multiple hubs with these things in them. This clip, for example, might not be the same one shown off in the teaser trailer, but instead a later room. Even though Scorn Guy is merely brandishing his piston weapon, that doesn't mean that it's the only weapon he has at the time. If you compare his hands here with his hands in this picture, you might notice a bit of blood near the number 5. There is a convenient rule you can follow when analyzing this stuff. The bloodier his hands are, the earlier it takes place. The next shot shows off what's known as fleshy exhaust, these strange biological constructs leaping, no doubt very foul-smelling goop onto the ground around it. What's interesting about this is it's not just early in context of the trailers, it's early in context of Scorn. There's been models of it since the pre-alpha days. And why have I ignored the pre-alpha? I'll get to that later. There are a few clips that we have no context for at all. We just know it takes place in part 1, such as this guy right here. When does he come out? When do we fight him? Do we fight him? We don't quite know. We do see a baby version of him encased in the Scorn guy, and according to one of the Kickstarter milestone updates, this was supposed to be part of an enemy that you would face in the game. The next shot is pretty neat because you get to see the central pillars and flower pods that was seen in the 2020 gameplay trailer. This is one of the few times we get to see something from so early and cross-compare it with something relatively recent. We also see a Scorn person kind of growing out of a wall. Now, we have no idea if this is our character or just a random citizen of this horrible world we find ourselves in. He doesn't have any outfits or peripherals, and it would make sense for the game to begin at the beginning, the very first moment Scorn Guy woke up, since we do know Scorn people grow out of walls rather than experience childhood. But due to a lack of any context within the game itself, just that it takes place in part 1, we cannot say anything for certain. Perhaps it's a room Scorn Guy just wanders into at some point, and he sees those guys growing out of the wall. The rest of the trailer I don't think you can say anything about, because this part here kind of looks like it was very staged. It's a custom-made video for the trailer rather than a moment in the game itself. Even though the areas and weapons and items and whatnot are actually going to be in the game, perhaps even this exact corridor, I don't think there's anything definitive you can say about when this takes place. The next trailer is of course a Series X trailer, which has its own problems for our venture, because this was made and released after the devs received enough funding to start working on multiple areas of the game and not just chronologically, which means we can't even be certain that everything here takes place in what would be part 1 of the game. Some shots lack telltale signs of being in part 1, like this massive wall and bridge here that is noticeably absent of any bear infestation. Meanwhile, other parts, well, goddammit, they're here too. But I think the big question everyone has is, when does a centerpiece take place? This room filled with giant head statues and strange pregnant creatures in coffins. And I'm going to take a wild guess. I think this is closer to the end of part 1. And the reason for that is, typically in storytelling, the big reveals come towards the end. The big stuff about lore, the big stuff about the history of the world, the big reveals about your character. This is clearly a very significant room. It's one that looks bereft of any entities that are hostile to Scorn Guy. It's one that looks almost sacred. For all we know, this could be the closest thing Scorn Guy gets to seeing another intelligent entity. And it is entirely possible that this is where we get some major reveal about the world of Scorn that would have left us guessing and theorizing all the way to Scorn Part 2, whatever philosophical term Peklar wanted to use for that. But of course, that is wild speculation, but there is one thing, I think, that lends credence to it being far later than anything I've shown off previously. In the shot where Scorn Guy is about to use the coral thing to revive the strange pregnant entity, seriously, Ebb Software, please give that thing a proper name. You'll notice that he has some strange structures coming from the back of his head and draped around his shoulder. This is actually the same structure we see on the top of the gate at the end of the gameplay trailer. This is something entirely absent from our protagonist as he appears in the release date trailer, which means it's an extra element that he gains over the course of his adventure. Now, I don't know when this trailer takes place or if it's even a room in the game itself. Hell, the icon for Ebb Software's various social media accounts used to be this concept art of him wearing the biomask, and there's nothing over his shoulder here. There is one around his neck, and a much clearer picture of him in that trailer shot shows that yes, he is wearing the biomask there. Whatever journey our humble protagonist takes, he's going to be adding more and more to himself. Additional peripherals to help him traverse the nightmare world that is Scorn. So then what about part 1? Shouldn't it be the absolute earliest we've seen of anything, given it was made when Scorn was just 4 people in a shared dream? Alas, it's not quite that simple. The pre-alpha area was actually a demo area that Ebb Software sent out to multiple different potential publishers hoping to receive funding. And the response they got back time after time after time was, yeah, the game seems pretty good to play, but it's just a bit too weird for us to invest in. The early 2010s were not a time of innovation. But it being a demo area means that they can add and remove things as necessary. For example, in the Kickstarter demo we received, in the exact same small area, you get the wrist key, you get the shotgun, you upgrade your stone key. This is all stuff that takes place in a much wider area of the game, much greater distance between those things, but it was necessary to progress. Here, for example, is Scorn Guy with the pistol, and you can see he's waving it around, observing it. He doesn't do this every time he pulls it out. This is a special animation for when he first receives a weapon. But we've seen him get the pistol before, and it is not in that area. It's in a special rack similar to where he gets a grenade launcher in the 2020 gameplay trailer. If they can play fast and loose with that, what else can they add and subtract? Now, do I think this area is in the game? Yes, and it's in part 1. Peklar himself has said that the area is going to be in the final game, however different it may look. And we know the fan favorite Mold Man is also going to be in the final game. Now, I'm currently of the opinion that this area is probably after the facilities we see with all the bears infesting everything. There doesn't seem to be any in that trailer at all. But I suppose we will simply have to wait and see. Maybe the PR person will tip his hand and show off something even earlier in the game. Or maybe he'll show off that area but without any context. At least without any context one would be able to glean from a cursory glance. I of course will be keeping a very close eye on this stuff. This is the most information we've ever had about the game. Throughout the many years it's been in development, it has remained extremely mysterious, not just what's going on, but when is it going on. And now for the first time we're able to start piecing together a story, understanding the whens and wheres of Scorn World. And I do hope that in the coming months we get to see even more, and get a better understanding of this mysterious universe of odd forms and somber tapestries. But until that day comes, I suppose we'll just have to wait. I hope you enjoyed the video, that gave you something to think about and otherwise entertained you. Take care.